East African piracy, while not conquered, is coming under control, whilst West Africa, where sea crimes deal mainly with oil, is the new battlefront. More than 600 maritime and naval experts met in Cape Town last week for the annual Maritime and Coastal Security Africa Conference and exhibition to work on greater collaboration between countries to combat piracy. Professor Renfrew Christie, Dean of Research at the University of the Western Cape, joins us in our studio for a closer look at this battle. Professor Christie, just looking at some of the discussions made, in some of the releases that were sent out following the conference, you mentioned that significant gains have been made and progress has been made following the meetings to beef up security on our coastal areas. Just how far have we come?
We've come a very long way. We've got what's called deep coalitions, where non-government organizations, states, navies, customs, everybody works together on what is a scourge of the seas and what is very damaging to world economic development.
Just on that, those are several role players that are working in cooperation together. How did you get that right? It's not often that we have so many parties sitting down at a table and agreeing to implement something accordingly to help curb the scourge that we're seeing on our coastal areas.
It took much too long. Too many people were kidnapped. You'll remember the South African yachtsmen who were kept for 27 months. They should not have been that long. Once one realized that it is organized crime, it's not just poor Somali people trying to find a living, it's bankrolled out of Europe, bankrolled out of America. Once you realized that the sat-nav phones on the pirate skips were going via the satellite down to Italy, you realized you were dealing with the mafia. Then you started to have more robust terms of engagement, the right to use force in certain circumstances, a world initiative called the Djibouti Code under the International Maritime Organization, which is part of the United Nations. Once everybody realized it was a major problem costing tens of billions of dollars per year, then everybody got together, and the number of hijackings of big ships off Somali waters has done that. It's still a problem, mainly of little ships, but if you're kidnapped on a little ship and tortured by pirates, that's still awful. But the big ships are either avoiding it, they've all got much better at preventing pirates from boarding, so there are razor wire that explodes, there are huge drums of pepper spray, all sorts of nasty stuff, but to keep the pirates off. But in the end, I think the Somali state became slightly more stable. It was a feature of a weak state. And in that sense, Italy is still a failed state. But once you strengthen the international response, you could get those statistics to come down.
Professor Christie, we hear of the developments that have taken place on the east coast of Africa, but what's unfolding currently towards the west coast as well as the Gulf of Guinea? Are we seeing the scourge of violence increasing there slightly?
Absolutely, it's increasing. Pirates are like crooks on land. They go where the police are not. So they've gone round Africa, and there it's much more about oil. In piracy, everywhere is intertwined with human trafficking, child slaves, with pollution, toxic waste dumping, with money laundering. But that operation is moving to the Gulf of Guinea. Something like a third of Nigeria's oil is stolen, either on land, usually on the coast, or at sea. It's called bunkering. They find ways to transfer the oil into other bunkers. And there is an uptick in piracy in West Africa, such that we heard from Captain Philip Hollywood of the International Maritime Organization's Djibouti Code that the IMO is going to move, if you like, from Djibouti to West Africa to deal with West African piracy.
So how do we go about dealing with the West African piracy there now? Do we have enough skills or police forces, if I can refer to them as such, out at the seas to be able to combat this scourge?
Well, the African Union has a wonderful long-term strategic maritime plan, which my conference heard about. That's the Maritime and Coastal Security Africa Conference. And that plan requires each region and sub-region to have their own strategic plans. The real problem is to get the countries of the Gulf of Guinea working together. Because at the moment, if there's a pirate incident, quite often somebody in one port doesn't know the correct phone number in another port because it's in a different country next door to phone up and push the panic buttons. So there will be a sub-regional and regional plan for West Africa under the African Union. The International Maritime Organization will move in. It's important to stress that you have to have a land solution as well as a sea solution, because it is weak states that pirates play on. But eventually you've got to have large, fast naval ships with the right to use force where necessary under international law. And there's been a bit of a triumph in the United States courts. There was a pirate negotiator called Mohammed Shibin, who, although he didn't actually do the piracy, was negotiating for them. There was one big German ship that was taken off Somalia, the Margarita, and then a small United States yacht, the Quest. And the US Navy saw the Quest being captured and sailed towards the waters and shot the 4 crew members, the 4 Americans. Mohammed Shibin was then captured, taken to America and tried. And just this month we've had a decision by the appeals court saying that indeed he was legally tried and will legally spend the rest of his life in jail.